Congress passed a bill that created a panel of healthcare experts to make recommendations to Congress on how we could get better quality, lower cost. The problem is, every year, it would just go on a shelf, and nobody would act on it. So what we've said is, let's give that body some power. Let's
lower it. Do you know the power he wants to give that body?
Congress to vote.
Listen.
The proposals that they're making every
he wants this body to force decisions on Congress, with Congress really having no way to reverse course. Go ahead.
As a package. And that, I think, would incentivize and empower important changes. But here's the thing I want to emphasize, Chip. It's not going to reduce Medicare benefits. What it's going to do is to change how those benefits are delivered so that they're more efficient. Let me give you a very specific example. You've heard that as a consequence of our efforts at reform, the pharmaceutical industry has already said they're willing to put $80 billion on the table. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is because there's probably even more waste than $80 billion in terms of how the drug plan in Medicare is administered. We might be able to get $100 billion out or more.
All right, stop.
But the pharmaceutical
lower him a lot. All right, folks, so far, let's just organize ourselves here, because the other stations are just letting this guy run wild. He has no explanation on how he's going to pay for the massive cost of this program. He's lying about his efforts to massively increase the deficit. He's just throwing around numbers of savings. We saved $2 trillion. Where did this come from? I've never even heard this before, neither of you. So he just throws these numbers at us. Talks about maybe we can find $80 or $100 billion in savings. Nobody believes that. We don't even know what he's talking about. And so he's rambling on, throwing these things out at a press conference, trying to disarm you. And what I get out of this press conference is either he knows he's lying or he's delusional in making these statements. Go ahead.
And your administration recently turned down a request from a watchdog group seeking a list of healthcare executives who have visited the White House to talk about healthcare reform. Also, the TARP Inspector General recently said that your White House is withholding too much information on the bank bailouts. So my question for you is, are you fulfilling your promise of transparency in the White House?
Well, on the list of healthcare executives who visited us, most of the time you guys have been in there taking pictures. So it hasn't been a secret. And my understanding is we just sent a letter out providing a full list of all the executives. But frankly, these have mostly been at least photo sprays where you could see who was participating. With respect to all the negotiations not being on C-SPAN, you will recall in this very room that our kickoff event was here on C-SPAN.
Okay. She asked him about a list of the executives who he has met with. He says we've sent a letter that will have the list. I think he said that. But talking about C-SPAN and photo sprays, whatever the hell that is, sounds ugly. That is not an answer. Go ahead. Then
I would welcome it. I don't think there are a lot of secrets going on in there. And the last question with respect to TARP. Let me take a look at what exactly they say we have not provided. I think that we've provided much greater transparency than existed prior to our administration coming in. It is a big program. I don't know exactly what's been requested. I'll find out, and I will have an answer for you. Okay.
So why did it take 5 minutes to say that?
Thank you, Mr. President. You've said the recent bank profits indicate that there's been no sense of remorse on Wall Street for risky behavior, that we haven't seen a change in culture there. Do you think that your administration needs to be taking a harder line with Wall Street? And also, would you consider going a step further than your regulatory reform proposals and supporting a fee on risky activities that go beyond traditional lending?
Sure.
We were on the verge of a complete financial meltdown.
Oh.
And the reason was because
save the day. Thank
Wall
you.
Street took extraordinary risks with other people's money.
No, Barney
they were
Frank.
peddling loans.
You, as a lawyer for Acorn, you brought us to this point.
They were flipping those loans and leveraging those loans, and higher and higher mountains of debt were being built on loans that were fundamentally unsound. And all of us now are paying the price.
Yes, yes.
Now, I believe it was the right thing to do. As unpopular as it is, it was the right thing for us to do, to step in to make sure that the financial system did not collapse, because things would be even worse today
if we didn't nationalize the
those
banks.
steps not been taken.
And
it originated under
aren't
the Bush
working on
administration.
destroying the currency.
We continued it because, whether you're on the left or the right, if you talk to economists, they said that this could have the kinds of consequences that would drop us into a deep depression and not simply a very severe recession. Now, one of the success stories of the past 6 months is that we really have seen a stabilization in the financial system.
You did it! You rescued us!
But people are no longer talking about the financial system falling off a cliff. We've stepped away from the brink. And that's important, because what it means is there are a lot of companies right now that can go into the marketplace and borrow money to fund inventory, fund payroll, and that will help the economy grow as a whole. The problem is, now that the financial system has bounced back,
Want to know the truth, folks?
what you're seeing is that banks are starting to make
The
profits.
banks, to the extent that they recover or are recovering as a result of actions of the Federal Reserve, not Obama, in pouring money into those banks. And the way that it should have been done was slashing taxes across the board in every category, which would have increased liquidity, savings, investment, and the usual things that capitalism produces. Go ahead.
Then you benefit. But what we haven't seen, I think, is the kind of change in behavior and practices on Wall Street that would ensure that we don't find ourselves in a fix again where we've got to bail out these folks and while they're taking huge risks and
you're the guy taking the biggest risks of them all with your massive deficit
what
spending,
we need to do.
which much of it is so
We've got to pass
pointless.
financial regulatory reform. And this is an example of where folks say, well, should the Obama administration be taken on too much? The fact of the matter is that if we don't pass financial regulatory reform,
Yes.
then banks
that.
are going to go back to the same things that they were doing before. In some
that
ways,
is
it could be worse because now
bending
they know
over
that
backwards to
the federal
accommodate
government may
Acorn,
think that they're too big
and
to
Barney
fail.
Frank,
And
and you.
so, if they're unconstrained, they could take even more risks. And so, there are a number of elements of financial regulatory reform.
God, this
with respect to
guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and he rambles on and on. Am I the only one that thinks this? This is painful as hell.
Bonuses.
Go ahead.
But if
I've got to
Shane
do
does
it.
not
Go
work,
ahead.
Then
Almighty.
I think one proposal that I put forward is to make sure that at least shareholders of these companies know what their executives are being compensated, and that may force some reductions. For banks that are still receiving taxpayer assistance, we have a set of rules that gives us some control on reducing unwarranted compensation. And in terms of the last point that you made, which is the possibility of fees for transactions that we want to discourage, that is one of the ideas that is going to be working its way through the process. I think at minimum what we want to do is to make sure that
Lower him a second. So basically, insurance companies are bad, banks are bad, capitalism doesn't work, he saved the day, he's not a deficit spender, Bush is a deficit spender, and go ahead.
that's paid for through bank fees. We may need to make sure that there is a similar mechanism in place for some of these other far-out transactions. So if you guys want to do them, then you got to put something into the kitty to make sure that if you screw up, it's not taxpayer dollars that have to pay for it, but it's dollars coming out of your profits. Steve Koff, the Cleveland Plain Dealer.
Cleveland Plain Dealer. Here we go.
Thank you.
To follow up on Jake's question earlier, sir, so many Americans are concerned that this plan, particularly the government insurance, the public option, would lead to reduced